I was in the kitchen arranging a bouquet of daisies when I unintentionally overheard the phrase that would dismantle my entire life. "She'll never realize." The voice was my son's. The same son I carried in my arms, taught to slice strawberries, and defended from the whole world. At that instant, with the flowers slipping from my hand and my heart stopped in my chest, I understood. He was planning to steal from me. And worse, he spoke as if commenting on the weather, light calm, as if I were just an obstacle, not his mother. It was there, between a trembling pair of scissors and the coldness of that call, that my life changed forever. I'm so glad to have you here. Follow my story to the end and comment from which city you are watching. I want to know how far my story has reached. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, touching the petals of the daisies I had just bought at the market. I always liked arranging flowers in vases. It was my way of putting order into the day before the world fell apart. As I fiddled with the water, I heard Nathan's muffled voice coming from the office. I thought it was just another business call. But as I listened, I realized it wasn't. He spoke calmly, like someone rehearsing a well-practiced recipe. He said he would open the banking app early, before I woke up, and transfer the money directly to the account that was already set up. He detailed amounts, dates, even daily limits. My heart pounded faster. I felt a strange nausea rising from my stomach. The hand holding the scissors trembled. For years I shared everything with my son. The joint account came about when he convinced me it would be more practical. "If anything happens to you, Mom, I can take care of everything." And I wanted to believe him. But there, listening to his words like an invisible knife, I felt the ground disappear beneath my feet. Betrayal crept through the cracks of my reason. I stood motionless for long seconds. The flowers slipped from my hand and fell into the sink. I still heard Nathan saying with a light laugh that she'll never realize. My body went cold, and a part of me broke right there among the daisies and the cold ceramic. She'll never realize. I held the knife like someone clutching a branch in a current. I didn't know if I should wash the stems or just drop everything and go up to my room. Sweat beaded between my fingers, running down to my wrist. My heart beat like a runaway drum. I felt my body light, as if I were outside myself. Everything became blurry, and I thought I was going to faint. It was then that I saw myself holding that same knife years ago, teaching Nathan to cut strawberries. He wore a red apron stained with chocolate, and said he wanted to be a chef like his father. I remembered his laughter, his eyes shining as he offered me a crookedly cut piece. My Nathan. My boy. The one I raised with so much love and care. Memories came in waves, crashing into my present. I tried to cling to the image of the sweet, helpful, funny son. I refused, by instinct, to associate the cold voice on the phone with that barefoot boy with a light heart. But his phrase kept echoing in my mind. That malicious certainty, that coldness. Did I hear correctly? Did I really understand? Maybe I was mistaken. Maybe I misinterpreted. Maybe he was talking about something else. But the more I repeated this to myself, the less conviction I felt. She questions. Did I hear correctly? I decided to pretend nothing had happened. I smiled when he entered the kitchen. I asked if he wanted coffee. I talked about the weather. But inside me the alarm never ceased. Every gesture of his was now an enigma. Every word, an attempt to decipher who this man was who called himself my son. My eyes followed him as if watching a stranger. I started noticing his trips to the bank, the hours he spent on his cell phone, the papers he hid. He still hugged me, but his scent seemed different. It wasn't his cologne. It was something deeper, an absence of soul, an absence of connection. I wanted not to see, but it was no longer possible. Doubt had settled in, and the house was now a minefield. With each new day the pain grew. Fear mixed with love, and denial began to crack. Still, I forbade myself from acting impulsively. I needed to know more. I needed to confirm. I was afraid to accuse without proof. But, above all, I was afraid of being right. I need to be sure before acting, or it will be too late. Nathan was charming from a young age. He had lively eyes and a smile that melted any reprimand. When he misbehaved, he always had a creative explanation, and I foolishly laughed instead of scolding him. He broke things, touched where he shouldn't, but a simple "it was an accident, Mom," and everything was resolved. He knew how to manipulate even before he knew what the word meant. There was a day when he colored the entire wall with crayons. I was furious, but he ran to me with a poorly drawn picture in his hands, saying, "I made it for you, look." And I smiled even against my will. That was him. He reversed situations, got away with everything. Teachers said he was difficult to handle, but intelligent. Over time, I realized he rarely offered sincere apologies. He learned that simply changing his tone of voice or looking away was enough to get off scot-free. I thought it was a phase, that he would mature. But the years passed and the pattern continued. Nathan always seemed one step ahead of any rule, any responsibility. Perhaps the problem was never the mischief itself, but my refusal to see that behind that charm, there was an absence of limits. An absence that started with me. He always knew how to get away with things. I remember the day Julia came to pick up her last things after the divorce. We were in the backyard, the sky overcast. She looked at me with exhausted eyes and said, "He's half child, half rogue." I was stunned. That pierced me like a spear. No one had ever spoken of my son that way. It hurt. At the time I thought it was spite. I thought Julia was hurt, unfair. I tried to argue, to say that Nathan was good, just immature. But she cut me off with a look that said, "You know." And deep down I did know. I just didn't want to accept it. Those words stayed in my mind for weeks. After that day, I started paying attention to his actions with different eyes. Julia wasn't entirely wrong. Nathan knew how to play innocent, but he always escaped when things got tough. He was affectionate until he was challenged. He was gentle until he was told no. And I, his mother, was always the neutral ground where he could hide. When I saw him from afar, I saw a man who had never fully matured. An eternal 42-year-old teenager. The phrase echoes in Eleanor's mind. Still, I tried to justify it. I told myself it was society, the system, traumas, lack of opportunities. Everything was easier than admitting that my son could indeed be selfish. I preferred to blame the world rather than face the truth. I protected him from everything, including himself. I thought that if I loved him enough, he would go back to being the little boy who made me cards with colored paper. That affection would be enough to correct him. That he just needed more time, more love. I rationalized every action. I ignored the signs. I was complicit. And that's what hurts me the most now. But the voice I heard on the phone was not that of a lost man. It was that of someone determined, cold, calculating. For the first time, I let Julia's phrase echo inside me completely, without resistance, without denial. But perhaps Julia was right from the start. It was a stifling afternoon when Edward collapsed in the garden, without warning, without a sound. I found him lying among the hydrangeas, his gaze lost in the sky. The ambulance arrived quickly, but he was no longer speaking. At the hospital, tests confirmed an extensive stroke. My world began to crumble there, with wires and beeps surrounding the man who had always been my fortress. It was Nathan who showed up the next day. With a tense but solicitous face, he hugged me as he hadn't in a long time. He brought snacks, blankets, and offered to spend the nights at the hospital. I wanted to believe in that gesture. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of hope. He cared for his father tenderly, wiped his mouth, told old stories. Every little action of his brought me comfort. Nathan, my boy, seemed to have finally returned. He spoke with the doctors, held my hand through the nights, promised that everything would be all right. And during those days, my heart, so tired of fear, allowed itself to rest a little. I thought perhaps the suffering had transformed something within him. Deep down, I knew that pain unites. And maybe, seeing his father so fragile, Nathan had understood the value of family. The moments of silence beside Edward's bed seemed sacred. It was there, between sighs and machines, that I whispered to myself almost voicelessly. Has he changed? Edward passed away on a quiet morning. The monitor beeped softly, and the room was filled with an absolute emptiness. I didn't cry immediately. I sat beside him, my hand on his still chest, trying to absorb that the love of my life no longer breathed. I felt as if I had aged 50 years in a second. The house was mine again, but it felt different. The paintings, the furniture, the corners, everything screamed his absence. I walked through the rooms with a withered heart, talking to myself to keep from going crazy. Nathan stayed for a while. He helped with the funeral, answered calls, made coffee. It was strange but comforting. Lindsay came whenever she could, but she also had her children, her work. Deep down, what sustained me was knowing that Nathan was there. And he seemed different. Less anxious, more patient. I wanted to believe that the loss of his father had reorganized something inside him. Such grief can refine even the hardest of us. On the first night I spent alone in our marital bed, I hugged Edward's pillow and cried softly. It was like losing my bearings, the compass of life. When Nathan brought a tray with tea, I smiled with gratitude. And it was at that moment that I heard his words, spoken almost without thinking. Now it's just the two of us. Maya was the one who helped me with everything right after the funeral. She had known Edward for years, and always handled our finances carefully. She sat with me, explained every document, every value, every choice that needed to be made. I trusted her. She was a discreet but precise woman. Her presence gave me a sense of organization amidst the chaos. She suggested I simplify accounts, invest better, and consolidate the inheritance securely. I nodded without fully absorbing everything. Nathan participated in the meetings, took notes, showed interest. He said he was there for whatever I needed, and Maya seemed to approve of this new version of him. Together we did the restructuring. A new account organized securities, preserved retirement. Maya put together a detailed financial plan, and I, lacking the strength to object, simply followed her guidance. It was a relief not to have to decide alone. With everything formalized, I could finally breathe a little easier. I just didn't know that, no matter how careful Maya was, there was something she could never foresee. Something that was already silently brewing. But there was something Maya couldn't foresee. A few weeks later, Nathan walked into the living room with a black folder and a sparkle in his eyes. He said he had an idea. A business. A small but promising investment. A friend needed partners and guaranteed a return in 3 months. He spoke with enthusiasm, with his hands, like in the old days when he sold dreams at Sunday dinner. I looked at him and saw that spark that made me believe so many times that he just needed a chance. He said it was different this time. That he wasn't asking for much, just a push. I saw a mix of hope and urgency on his face. And even without understanding all the details, I gave in. I wrote the check. Signing that paper hurt, but it also gave me a sense of usefulness. As if, in some way, I was still needed. He thanked me with a kiss on the forehead and promised he would make me proud. I believed him. Because mothers believe, even when the ground is already cracking. I put the receipt in the cabinet drawer and tried not to think too much. I wanted to believe he was on the right path. That everything finally would fall into place. This time it will work out. However, Lindsay noticed quickly. When she found out about the check, she called, indignant. She came to my house, her face red with frustration. She said I was letting myself be fooled. That Nathan hadn't changed at all. She yelled that I needed to open my eyes. I reacted badly. I said she didn't understand. That it was easy to judge from afar. We argued fiercely. She accused, I defended. She showed proof, I said it was an exaggeration. That conversation ended with tears and slammed doors. She said she couldn't watch all of this up close anymore. That if I chose to continue in that cycle, she needed to distance herself to preserve her own sanity. I stayed there, sitting in the empty living room, looking at the couch where Edward often sat with our grandchildren on his lap. The loneliness now felt thicker. Nathan, who was sleeping in the guest room, didn't mention the argument. He just left earlier the next day, saying he would resolve pending matters. I lost count of the hours I spent replaying every phrase Lindsay had said. And even though I felt the initial anger, there was something inside me that began to agree with her. But I couldn't admit it. Not yet. Lindsay distances herself. As the days passed, Nathan disappeared more often. He said he needed to focus on the project. I prepared dinner for 2 but ate alone. The phone rang less. The silence of the house embraced me with a coldness difficult to bear. And even so, I continued to defend that emptiness as if it were a presence. I wondered if I was being unfair. If somehow I had failed both my children. Was I too harsh with Lindsay? Or too blind with Nathan? My mind spun, searching for answers that my heart refused to face. I tried to fill the time with books, flowers, old TV shows. But whenever I closed my eyes, I relived his voice on the phone. And next to it, guilt. Guilt for having doubted him. For having given him money. For having argued with my daughter. For feeling that something was profoundly wrong, and yet remaining silent. So why do I feel so deceived? It was on a cloudy morning that Nathan appeared with coffee in hand and a plea in his eyes. He sat at the kitchen table and spoke of security, predictions, and how important it would be for him to be able to act quickly if something happened to me. I didn't understand immediately. Then he explained. He wanted direct access to my bank account. He suggested I add his name. My heart raced. I looked out the window, searching for an anchor on the horizon. He smiled, but there was something forced about that smile. It's just a precaution, Mom. You don't have anyone but me anymore. The phrase weighed like a stone in my chest. I remembered the past, Lindsay's warnings, the promises that were never kept. And still I remained silent. Nathan insisted lightly, but each word was a drop pushing my fear. What if you fall? What if you need hospitalization? He listed possibilities like someone setting a trap with petals. And I, foolish, tried not to show my internal dizziness. I wanted to refuse, but guilt and loneliness pulled me to his side. At that moment I heard his voice once more, as on the phone as in the past, but now softened by a false tenderness. I knew something was wrong, but he touched my hand and murmured as if protecting me. What if something happens to you, Mom? I went to the bedroom to get the folder with documents. Inside, I found the old power of attorney, the one that gave Lindsay powers over some medical and financial decisions. I remembered the day Edward suggested we put our eldest daughter as legal guardian. She's balanced, he used to say. And she was. Always. But now, alone and insecure, that seemed distant. Nathan insisted it wasn't fair to depend only on Lindsay. That, after all, he was the son who was more present. I'm not asking for control, just partnership, he said. The logic made sense, if I ignored the recent past and clung only to the needy present that surrounded me. I felt as if I was breaking a silent agreement with Edward. As if I was opening a door that we had always kept locked. But my hands were already trembling when I signed the papers. Nathan celebrated with a tight hug and a, "You'll see how much easier everything will be now." I put away the old power of attorney, my hands cold like someone trying to hide a body. I took a deep breath and repeated to myself like a desperate mantra. It was just a precaution. Right? The following week we went to the bank. Susan, the manager, greeted us kindly. She had known our family for years, knew of Edward's passing. When I mentioned the account, she hesitated for a second, as if expecting someone else. Nathan smiled, joked, made small talk. I signed the documents without paying much attention to the terms. Upon leaving, he thanked me as if I had given him a gift. "Now you can relax, Mom," he said, as he carefully folded the paper and put it in his pocket. I tried to smile, but my stomach was churning. The account with 840,000 reais now had two owners. Two paths. Two wills. That night I dreamed of safes opening and coins falling to the floor endlessly. I woke up sweating, feeling something slipping through my fingers. I tried to rationalize, to say it was for the best. But anguish settled in like a silent guest in my house. But something inside me screamed, "Danger." It was on a quiet afternoon that everything was confirmed. I was organizing some winter clothes in the bedroom when I heard the office door close. Nathan answered a call. I thought about leaving to give him privacy, but then I heard him say my name. I stopped motionless. His voice was low, but too clear to ignore. He spoke again about the account. He detailed the withdrawal limits. He quoted the exact balance. He said he would make the transfers in 3 stages to avoid triggering an alert in the system. My heart pounded. My mouth went dry. He spoke as if I were just an obstacle to be bypassed. As if I were already out of the game. I felt the blood drain from my hands. The closet blurred before my eyes. And then, like a final punch, I heard the phrase that sealed everything. "She won't even notice." I fell onto the bed. My body trembled. Clothes fell around me as if the whole world was crumbling. There was no more doubt, no more supposition, no more possible innocence. Nathan was not just irresponsible. He was ready to steal from me. Coldly, calculatedly, deliberately. And yet his voice seemed light. Calm. She won't even notice. I swallowed my tears with effort. My throat felt like glass. I wanted to scream, to confront him, but fear held me back. I picked up my phone with trembling hands and dialed Lindsay's number. When she answered, it took me seconds to speak. I only managed to say, "I heard everything. He's going to take the money." Her voice tensed. She didn't yell. She didn't judge. She just said, "We'll fix this now." She asked me to take a deep breath. "Can you go to the bank today?" I looked at the clock. There were only a few hours left before closing. My mind was torn between panic and haste. I needed to do something. And fast. Lindsay insisted. "We can't wait until tomorrow. Every second counts." I nodded in silence, already grabbing my purse and documents. Go to the bank. Now? On the way, the world seemed to spin faster. The streets, the cars, the traffic lights. Everything was a blur. I repeated Lindsay's instructions like a psalm. At the bank, Susan greeted me again. When I explained, her eyes became serious. "We'll sort this out now, Mrs. Eleanor." I felt a mix of relief and shame. We transferred everything to a new account. One just for me. We removed Nathan's name. 17 cents remained in the old account. I looked at the receipt with tearful eyes. It was as if I was breaking an invisible cord. Susan looked at me with compassion. "Would you like me to call someone to escort you home?" I shook my head. I walked out with firm steps, but inside, the fragile girl who still existed in me wept. I arrived home before Nathan closed the door, locked it. I sat on the couch, and for the first time in a long time, I felt a kind of control return to my life. I looked at the new account, the secure balance, and thought of Edward. I thought of what he would say if he saw where we were. And I also thought of what was to come. Because one thing was certain. Nathan didn't know yet. But he would soon know. And when that happened, I would have to be ready. Tomorrow, before he can withdraw. I arrived at the bank with a racing heart, as if fleeing from something that still had no face. Susan recognized me immediately and, seeing my state, silently led me to a private room. I showed her the statements, explained what I had heard, and asked, "I want to transfer everything. Today." She didn't hesitate. She typed quickly while I was cold with sweat. With each click, I felt as if I was dismantling a bomb. Susan spoke calmly, but her eyes showed urgency. "We'll transfer everything to a new account in your name. Just yours." I nodded, unable to form complete sentences. She paused and asked, looking directly at me, "Are you sure you want to leave only 17 cents? I felt a tightening in my chest. It was too symbolic. Leaving only 17 cents seemed cruel, but leaving any more terrified me. "Yes," I replied. "Leave exactly that." Susan let out a small sigh and completed the operation. I signed the papers with a trembling hand, trying to maintain my dignity, even though I felt torn inside. In the end, she placed the receipt on the table. "It's done." I held that paper as if it were a shield. It was more than money. It was the end of an illusion. A silent break. And also the beginning of something I couldn't yet name. "Are you sure you want to leave only 17 cents? With the new account open and secure, I asked for Nathan's name to be completely removed. Susan made the alteration with the same precision, without comment, like someone who knows a lot but respects silence. I watched his name disappear from the screen. A line. A click. As if everything we had lived fit into an exclusion command. I signed more documents, reviewed instructions, and asked for confidentiality. "If he comes, tell him I need to authorize anything." Susan just nodded. When I finished, she offered me water. I declined. I wanted to leave, but I also feared what would come next. That was just the first step. The easiest one. At the bank door, I hesitated. The sun was still shining, but everything seemed gray. I clutched my purse to my chest and walked slowly. Each step seemed heavier. I got into the car with the feeling that now, yes, I had crossed an invisible line. A line that perhaps allowed no return. I took out my phone and texted Lindsay. "It's done." She replied with a simple, "Now take care of yourself." And before putting the phone away, I added, "Don't tell him anything yet." Coming home was like entering unknown territory. The same living room, the same couch, but everything seemed displaced. The walls listened, the floor seemed to creak differently. I sat in Edward's armchair and stayed there, with the receipt still in my hands, like someone holding a dangerous secret. Nathan didn't come back that night. He said he would stay at a friend's house. This gave me time but not peace. I spent hours listening to the sounds of the house, trying to imagine his reaction when he saw the emptied account. The clock didn't move. Fear spread like fog, taking over all the rooms. The night was long. Sleep came in pieces and every noise made me get up. At 4 in the morning, I got up and went to check the door locks. The house was mine, but I no longer felt like its owner. Not even of my rest. Not even of my courage. I knew the hour of truth was approaching. That soon the shouts, accusations, and threats would knock on my door. And this time I couldn't hide behind love. What will he do when he finds out? The sound of the key in the lock startled me awake. It was morning and I was still in my robe, my heart already pounding. Nathan burst in abruptly, his face distraught. He threw his backpack on the floor and came towards me. His eyes filled with fury. "What happened to the account?" he blurted out. My voice failed at first, but I recomposed myself. I slowly stood up and faced the man in front of me. He seemed like a stranger. The veins in his neck bulging. His gaze clouded. "You touched the account, Mom?" He yelled, demanded, as if speaking to an employee. "That money is mine too." I felt fear rise like a tide, but also a new firmness. I took a deep breath and said, "No, it's not. This money is mine. Your father's. From our 40 years of work." He laughed, mocking. "Oh, now you're going to give me a moral lecture, are you?" Every word of his cut me. But I did not yield. I remained firm. I wanted to retreat, but my legs remained still. It was now or never. It was me or him. The past or the truth. I clung to the little piece I had left and whispered, "This money is mine too." Nathan paced the room like a caged animal. He asked how I had the nerve, how I could do this to him. Then with a dry voice I said, "You said I wouldn't notice. That you would withdraw it in 3 stages. That you would use another account to hide it." He stopped. The silence was immediate. His eyes widened. "You were listening?" he asked, incredulous. The mask fell. That charismatic and sweet man turned into a blur of anger and surprise. I nodded. I heard everything. Every word. He tried to cover up, laughed nervously, said it was just a misunderstanding, a casual conversation. But it was too late. The truth was between us, clear as the sun. And there was no turning back. I felt sad. Very sad. Because he was still my son, but he was no longer my boy. He was a man who plotted against me, who saw me as an obstacle, not as a mother. He still tried to reverse the situation, call me paranoid, manipulated by Lindsay. But I didn't listen anymore. Because now I saw clearly. Were you listening? I went to the hallway and opened the drawer where the spare keys were kept. I held out my hand to him. "Leave the house key." He hesitated. "Are you kicking me out?" I just nodded. "You chose to leave the moment you decided to betray me." He threw the key hard on the table. He picked up his backpack and before leaving said something I didn't quite hear. I closed the door as soon as he passed. I locked it. I sat on the living room floor and cried. I cried like I had never cried before. For him. For me. For everything we let die over the years. But at the same time, something inside me breathed again. It was pain, yes. But it was also freedom. Finally, I set a limit. Finally, I protected myself. Finally, I understood what it was to love with firmness. Now I know who you are. My phone vibrated many times a day. Long messages, alternating between apologies and cruel accusations. Calls I let ring until they stopped. There was something desperate in Nathan's words, as if he was still trying to exert control through guilt. But I didn't answer. I couldn't anymore. Every phrase of his came like a snare. "You're pushing me away for no reason. It's not fair. I was always your favorite son." But among the manipulations, one phrase stuck. "You'll regret it, Mom." It hurt. It hurt more than I'd like to admit. But not enough to make me back down. I deleted some messages without reading them. Others I read calmly then deleted. The pain still existed, but firmness now grew alongside it. Like a tree that finally decides to root itself in its own soil. Nathan didn't understand that silence was my protection. My definitive answer. It was grief within grief. Because I knew it was no use arguing with someone who didn't want to listen. And this time I no longer wanted to justify the unjustifiable. "You'll regret it, Mom." I called a locksmith in the morning. I asked him to change all the locks in the house. He didn't question me. He just did the job quickly and discreetly. Then I sat at the table with the will documents. I picked up the pen and with steady hands, rewrote what was necessary. For the first time without his name. I included Lindsay. I protected my grandchildren. I organized everything so that nothing else would be vulnerable. Maya guided me patiently. She said it was an act of love, not revenge. And I understood. To love is also to protect, including from those who hurt us. Especially from those who have already hurt us too much. When everything was finished, I closed the folder and took a deep breath. It was symbolic but also real. A necessary, painful, yet liberating cut. I looked up at the sky through the window and thought that Edward would have approved every step. Now everything is in my name. A few days later, I followed Lindsay's advice and went to a support group. Older people like me, sitting in a circle, sharing stories that mix shame and courage. When I introduced myself, I trembled. My voice came out choked, but I told everything. For the first time without softening it. There was silence after I finished. And then an old woman held my hand and said, "You did what all of us should have already done." Others nodded with their eyes. There was understanding there. No judgment. Just the echo of similar pains, transformed into collective strength. I came home lighter. It was as if the shared weight didn't hurt as much. Every story heard was an open window. A reminder that there are more like me. And that surviving is a shared verb. I drank tea that night with pleasure. I slept without nightmares. And even alone in the room for the first time in months, I didn't feel invisible. I'm not alone. 9 months have passed since the day I closed the door behind Nathan. The house no longer felt like a battlefield. It was once again home. The furniture was in the same places, but I was no longer the same. The silence now welcomed me, it didn't pierce me. I learned to live with it. Lindsay brought the grandchildren on weekends. They ran through the house, scattered toys and joy. I watched them tenderly, but without the burden of needing to prove anything. It was good to be a grandmother. It was good not to try to compensate for the past, just to live the present. To relearn to love with lightness. I no longer spoke of Nathan with them. Not because I wanted to hide, but because I understood that certain pains don't need to be passed on. When the eldest asked me if their uncle would come for Christmas, I simply said, "He's traveling." And we quickly changed the subject. Their childhood didn't need to carry my scars. Yes, sometimes the longing was strong. But it was a longing for the idea of a son, not for the man he became. And I knew with every fiber of my being that it was possible to miss him. Without wishing for his return. Longing exists but not dependency. On my birthday, a white envelope arrived with no sender. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was from Nathan. I opened it carefully. Inside, a generic card that read, "Happy birthday, Mom." No signature, no personal message. Just the polite emptiness of someone who still hadn't understood the harm he caused. I stared at the paper for a few minutes. Then I folded it and put it in a box, along with other memories that no longer hurt as much. It was strange to receive something from him after so long. But it didn't affect me. I didn't cry. Nor did I smile. I just accepted the gesture for what it was. A formality. The pain had given way to lucidity. That wasn't reconciliation. It was just a reminder that he still existed. But unlike before, it didn't throw me off balance. It didn't reopen wounds. It merely confirmed what I already knew. We were distant. And that was necessary. It was just a card. Just a piece of paper. Just a phrase. It was just a name and a date. That afternoon, I watered the garden calmly. The hydrangeas were in full bloom, and the scent of roses enveloped me like an old embrace. I sat in the rocking chair, a book in my lap, and looked up at the clear sky. I felt a rare peace. Not euphoria, not exaggerated happiness. Just peace. I remembered Edward. I spoke to him in thought. I said everything was all right now. That even with all the losses I was alive. And more, I was whole. Reorganized. Standing. The pain had left room for something new. Something simple and essential. The right to exist for myself. I went to the hallway mirror and faced my reflection. The wrinkles, the white hair, the tired eyes, everything was there. But there was something more too. A soft, serene, firm light. A woman who survived a hurricane and even so chose to plant flowers around her. I closed my eyes, took a deep breath, and silently repeated to myself what I so often needed to hear from others. Finally, I am mine too. Today, I sat in Edward's chair for the first time in a long time. That armchair had always been his. For years, I avoided settling there, as if respecting his space was a way of maintaining his presence. But now it wasn't absence anymore. It was memory, and I wanted to remember with sweetness without pain. The sun streamed through the living room window, as it did on mornings when he read the newspaper. I picked up one of his favorite books, the blue-covered one he read and reread as if it were a ritual. I leafed through the pages, found notes in the margins, his comments about the world and about me. I smiled. It hurt, but I smiled anyway. On the shelf next to it were family photos. One of the two of us at Lindsay's wedding. Another with the grandchildren still small. A third, older one with Nathan still a boy on his father's shoulders. I looked at that image as one observes a time impossible to return to, a time when we still believed that love was enough. I thought about everything we lived through, about everything we endured in silence, about every choice made out of fear, out of affection, out of blindness, and about every limit I failed to impose, believing that was being a good mother. But there, in that chair, I understood that love that submits does not save, it drowns. And I no longer want to drown. Edward taught me patience, Lindsay clarity, and Nathan taught me with pain the value of firmness. How loving is also saying no, even with a broken heart. I learned that protecting those we love doesn't mean protecting them from the truth. Sometimes the truth is the only real gift. I haven't received any messages for weeks. No sign. The silence is now absolute. And as strange as it may seem, that gives me peace. His absence has become space. And in that space I am learning to live. I don't know what will become of Nathan. I don't know if he will ever change. But that answer is no longer mine to give. Today I plant my flowers without looking over my shoulder. No one else stalks my freedom. I open the windows without fear. I leave the door unlocked during the day. The locks are different now, not of metal but of consciousness. I no longer open my soul to those who try to use it as a shortcut to their own emptiness. Maya came to have tea with me last Tuesday. We sat on the porch like two women who had survived silent wars. She said my finances were secure, that my retirement was under control. And I, for the first time, didn't ask for details. I trusted, because today I trust better. I listen more. I choose more carefully. The support group is now part of my routine. We meet on Thursdays. We exchange stories, tears, and small victories. Sometimes we just have coffee and talk about the weather. But there's a kind of unspoken alliance between us. A pact of women who learned, late or not, to protect who they are. I am no longer just someone's mother, nor just Edward's widow. I am the woman who wakes up early to walk, who tends the garden, who reads romances with happy endings, who teaches her grandchildren to plant tomatoes, who sometimes laughs alone because now solitude doesn't hurt as much as submission, because living is also knowing when to close the door and when to leave it open. Now, I'm curious about you who heard my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you experienced something similar? Support the channel, subscribe, like, comment, and share this video. I'm leaving another story on the final screen that you will also like, and it will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching. See you in the next video.